It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Ed Hernandez. He is a member of the California State Senate. And sir, I want to speak with you about, I think, one of the most pressing issues of our day, and that's the question of water. Yes. It's hard to deny that we just have not seen the rain we're used to seeing, and it is impacting Californians up and down the coast. What are you hearing and seeing on the ground in your San Gabriel Valley district?
Well, I agree with you. Water is the absolute most important thing. It's precious. It's how we exist as individuals, and it's an element that's very, very important to all of us. What I'm hearing is what my constituents are saying is, yes, they agree that there's a drought. We need to address it. But more importantly, I think they need to be educated on the fact that we have a bond potential on the ballot this year, and that they should either pass it or we need to have a discussion if we put a new bond on the ballot as well.
And let's talk about the bond. You have been in the legislature for some time. I'm not sure if you were in the Senate when in 2009 there was a negotiation to get a bond on the ballot for 2010. Were you in the Senate then?
I was in the Assembly at the time, but I was very involved in that legislation.
Okay, so you know it well, about $11 billion. For a variety of reasons, that bond was pushed off the 2010 ballot, pushed off the 2012 ballot. As we speak today, what do you make of that bond, which was part of a grand compromise?
Right. Well, the original bond that was put in was an $11.1 billion bond. It was the most interesting piece of politics I've ever seen.
Well stated.
In the legislature. But it was postponed because of the bad economic times, and we felt that the voters wouldn't pass that large of a bond. But because of the dire consequences of what's occurring with the drought, the fact that we need to fix our infrastructure, we think it's time now. But the question is that enough or is that too much? That's the big question.
When we look at that bond, like you said, interesting is one way to describe it. It was a compromise between north-south, east-west, farmers, users.
Definitely.
One could argue that within that bond was pork. You know, but my pork is your bacon, so it's hard to know how to define that. Could the bond that was passed by the legislature in 2009, could that be the one that we ultimately see on a November 2014 ballot?
It could, and I think the most important thing is today is different than it was back during the recession.
Sure.
I think we need to do a poll to see what the voters are willing to spend, and if they're willing to do the 11.1, I think we need to put that bond forward. And I agree, once pork is somebody else is not pork. Give you an example. I held out last time to make sure that we got money for groundwater contamination and recycling. To me, that's not pork. That's an essential part for the San Gabriel Valley. But if you're going to have a similar bond this year, I think they're going to continue to raise as far as the amount of money because of what every legislator is going to want for their district.
Let's talk about one key element of the bond, and that is the question of storage.
Okay.
It's a word that can mean a lot of different things to different people, but there's no question that to the extent there is a debate going on between Democrats and Republicans on the question of the bond, your Republican colleagues are looking for more money for storage, whereas your Democratic colleagues, not as much money. How do you define storage?
Well, there's different types of storage. And I'll tell you the one that I'm extremely supportive of is one here in the San Gabriel Valley. We have an aquifer below us. We can not only fulfill that amount, but increase it and store water there for future use.
That's groundwater storage.
That's groundwater storage.
So,
that's one method. That's one method.
But when I think of storage,
you're thinking of the dams.
The dams. And it could mean new dams, or it could mean repairing and or renovating existing dams. So let's start with above ground storage. What do you make of the above ground storage question?
Well, I mean, I think that what we first of all have to do is look to address the capacity issue and more importantly, what's needed for all the residents in the state of California. And if it's justifiable, yes, we need to look at above ground storage. But I don't think to the point where we ruin the environment, where it's too expensive. And I think we need to look at the most efficient ways first. And I think one of the most efficient way is superstoring water below us in the form of storage. That doesn't cost anything to build. We just infuse it with water.
So let's talk about groundwater, which has been a resource for California for centuries, literally. California is interesting. It's accused of being an over-regulated state. But on the question of groundwater, we really don't have groundwater regulations. And so do you feel as if we start relying more on groundwater storage that we will have the protections we need?
We definitely will, because anything that's going to be dispensed to the consumer needs to be clean and it should be affordable, but more importantly, it needs to be safe to drink. And as you know, in the San Gabriel Valley, most of the water that we have below us is contaminated from the aerospace industry and all that perchlorate that's been in all the VOCs that are within the water. So what we need to do is make sure that the polluters pay their fair share. We've gotten money from the federal government, but I honestly believe that the state of California needs to pay its fair share to clean up the water that we have here in this valley.
We also have the debate between man and fish. I'll just call it that debate. And you've heard of this fish before, the Delta smelt.
Right.
It's a very small fish, maybe 2 inches long. Whether you like it or not, court after court after court has held that the Delta smelt is entitled to protection. And through that protection, water may or may not being wasted, whatever that means, because that water needs to be used for the environment, for the Delta smelt. It does beg the question, though, about how do we balance the desire for species protection, for environmental protection, with the needs of humans who need water.
Right. And I don't disagree, but keep in mind these are federal laws that we have to follow. They're species that need to be protected. It's not any different than the goats here up in the San Gabriel Mountains for Highway 39 that we're dealing with. But at the same time, if there's a need for human consumption, we have to make sure we balance that equally as well.
But should we look to work with the federal government to start reevaluating regulations as it relates to species protection, environmental protection, however you define that?
I think we should have a conversation with the federal government and to look at how that both not only the species, but more importantly, how human consumption is addressed as well.
We also can't ignore the fact that California, and specifically Central California, is the salad bowl for the entire nation. I think at least 50% of all vegetables grown in Central California. Ag is a huge economic driver in our state, close to $50 billion. They use a lot of water.
Use quite a bit of water, yes.
Quite a bit of water.
Yes.
Some would say up to 80% of the state's water. So how do we engage in a conversation with the ag industry about their use of water in a fashion that doesn't jeopardize all those jobs, all the food, but also looks at the intricacies of what we're facing?
Right. Well, first of all, and what's important, as you mentioned, it's a very important part of our economy. We need to make sure that the agricultural industry stays in California, but not only stays, but flourishes, but have that balance to make sure that they can have affordable water for growing and not at the expense of the entire state. And that's why we need to look at the entire package of how we protect our water system, make sure that the infrastructure is proper, make sure that we have enough water for all entities, not only whether it's protection of the species, but also of our farmlands, as well as the consumers in the state of California.
And what about protection from natural disasters?
That
Earthquakes,
as well, yes, very, very much so.
tsunamis, whatever it may be. Is that under discussion as part of the bond, or is that really a Bay Delta Conservation Plan question, which is outside of the bond?
I think that's a part of the discussion, and here is the absolute worst case scenario. If there's a major earthquake and the levees break and all of a sudden you get a flood of salt water and it contaminates that water, now we have inability to get Northern California water to certain parts of the southern part of the state. Fortunately, the San Gabriel Valley can maintain itself from its own aquifers. But those are the things that we need to look at to make sure that we shore up our infrastructure so that it's secure in the event of a natural disaster.
In our final moments, do you expect to see a bond on the ballot November 2014?
I hope to see a bond, and I'm optimistic because I think now is the time. The economy's picking up. I think the electorate is very interested. If you just look at the most recent polls, they understand and know that there has been a drought, and they are aware that there needs to be something done in the state of California.
His name is Ed Hernandez, member of the California State Senate, and I am Brad Pomerance, and this is Charter California Edition. Welcome back to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and he is back. He is Eric Bauman. He is the chair of the Los Angeles County Democratic Party, also the vice chair of the California Democratic Party. And so I want to speak with you about the upcoming June primary. Fascinating revolution in California elections. Instead of the Democrats nominating and the Republicans nominating, this is the first cycle whereby for statewide offices, the top two candidates, regardless of party, advance to November.
That's correct.
How is that playing for you as a leader in the Democratic Party in a pretty blue state?
Well, first of all, remember they call this the guerrilla primary.
Oh, yes.
And the reason they call it the guerrilla primary is obvious, because it's like no holds barred.
Right.
And you have to think, if you're a candidate, you have to think differently about the race. You don't have to necessarily be the number one guy. You could be the number two guy and still be in the election in November and win. But what tends to happen is you have multiple Democratic candidates because it's such a blue state.
Right.
And the Republicans have mostly been smart and kept themselves to one or two candidates, except in the governor's race.
Right.
Which is kind of upside down from all the others.
I had presumed, and not preferred, just presumed, that in some of these down ballot candidate races, that we would see two Democrats advance. I look at maybe the controller's race or the Secretary of State's race before there was an indictment, be that as it may. But now, I don't know. I'm not so sure. I mean, what's your analysis of what happens based upon the formula you just described?
Well, here's the thing to think of. 44% of the voters in California are Democrats. 28% are Republicans.
Right.
22% are not party affiliated. So if you have two or three strong Democrats running, dividing the Democrat plus the Democratic portion of independent voters, you don't get two that end up with enough to be in the top two, especially if you're running against one Republican. So we likely see in most races a Democrat versus a Republican. There's a danger potentially in certain races where you could end up with the Democrats defeating themselves.
Right.
Though it doesn't look that way. Look, the Democrats look really strong in California this year. There is no reason for us to suspect that we're not going to take every office.
And let's talk about the Democrats in 2014 in California. If you look at other states, especially on the federal side, the Democrats are not looking so strong. Who knows what it will be like in November? I mean, Obamacare, its numbers are starting to turn more positive than negative, 7.5 million people insured, so the story could change. Even if the story continues to sour or stays sour, in California, we continue to see a strong Democratic Party. I mean, the wave of 2010 crashed at the Nevada border. What is it about this state? You know, even
the people of California are smart.
No,
they
but
understand. They understand that the party that stands with working men and women is the party they want to stand with.
But you're smart. I mean, you're a smart guy. You know, you even look at New York, a Democratic state. They had Democratic losses in 2010. Pennsylvania, big Democratic state. They had losses in 2010. I mean, there is something about California's blue hue that is just dark. Honestly.
Look, first of all, we run better campaigns. Second of all, we have a much deeper bench because we've dominated state government and local government for so long. We have all of these people who are ready to step up and run, who are fully prepared. I mean, if you look at a race like the Secretary of State's race, on the one hand, on the Democratic side, you have a guy who is number two at Common Cause, and on the other hand, you have a guy who is a state senator and the president of the LA City Council. I mean, these are people who have true leadership experience, and they're running against candidates that are not quite the same.
So let me ask you about that coalition. It has been over the last decade or so white liberals, Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans, which had been Republican until the last decade or so. But the Asian American coalition is starting to fray a bit as it relates to its commitment to the Democratic Party and why it's a debate over affirmative action. There are some Asian American groups that believe that if affirmative action is brought back, especially in education, it could hurt their admissions numbers in the UC and CSU system. It's been a tough few months on this issue.
Well, let's start with a couple of key points. First and foremost is we have this tendency to talk about the Asian Pacific Islander community as if they're a monolithic community. They are not. There are Korean Americans, Chinese Americans,
Right.
Vietnamese Americans, Filipino Americans, and they have distinct and separate different needs and community activities. First. Second, the fact that there's been a lot of noise about it doesn't mean that that is affecting voters. You know, we often, for those of us who are in the silo, we
Right.
hear this stuff and it echoes around and we think it's this huge thing, and to the average voter is not having this discussion.
Point well taken. But that being said, if I may, yes, each group within the Asian American Coalition is unique. But if you look at 2012, Asian American groups were swaying and swinging wildly to the Democrats.
But the particular issue that you're discussing primarily affects Chinese American students, for example. So, but not to dismiss this. This is a complicated issue, and what it's about is the fact that all Democrats believe that we should be able to expand opportunity for every Californian, right? And unfortunately, what happened, Prop 209 has put a lid on the number of African Americans and Latinos who've been able to get into the University of California and the California State Universities. So there's a struggle right now. Let me finish this point,
Please.
though. There's a struggle to get to a solution, and we will get to a solution. But you know what? The fastest and earliest solution isn't always the best solution, but also everybody has to come to the table and work it through. And that's what Speaker Perez has set in motion by bringing everybody to the table, by bringing in high-level people to help guide this discussion so that we can get to a solution that benefits all of our kids.
There's also a risk, though, presumably with white liberals. I mean, white liberals are with the Democratic Party on many issues: healthcare reform, immigration reform. Affirmative action continues to cause a little heartache for limousine liberals.
Well, you know, life is not perfect. There was once a book, a movie, and a song that was called "I Beg Your Pardon, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden." It's not a rose garden. It takes a lot to build this big tent that we have in the Democratic Party. But the good news is our tent is big enough for everybody. And when you talked about the coalition that makes up the Democratic Party, you left out two very important groups: gay and lesbian Californians and Jewish Californians.
Right.
These are all huge parts, along with African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Pacific Islanders.
And when you think about Jewish Americans from California, again, affirmative action can make some Jewish Americans a little queasy because it's been used as against them at times.
Right.
And
so politics is not a zero-sum game. Politics is the art of the possible. And the secret to success and true leadership is being able to bring this diverse coalition together and into harmony. And what we've been able to do through all of these issues, going back to Prop 187, in defeating the anti-union initiatives, in causing people to pass sales tax increases to help fund education. In all of these things, we've been able to bring the body politic together.
One group, one constituency that the Democratic Party has been working to foster has been veterans. It's a group that has traditionally fallen more Republican, but the numbers suggest that some veterans groups are starting to come along. I know the Democratic Party is in strong support, as I understand it, of an initiative called Prop 41. Talk to us about the initiative and why the Democratic Party is so strongly behind it.
So Prop 41 comes from a piece of legislation written by John Perez, which seeks to repurpose $600 million in already approved bonds for veterans housing to provide housing for homeless and near homeless veterans and to provide services to go along with that housing. What is extraordinary about this is that this is one of the rare times where both the California Democratic Party and the California Republican Party have both endorsed this measure. We have 46,000 veterans who will be coming back to California in the next 18 months as we close down in Afghanistan. And you know what? A lot of them are going to be homeless. A lot of them are going to be jobless. A lot of them are going to need services. And this is doing something with already approved bonds to make a big difference in their lives.
He is Eric Bauman. He is the chair of the Los Angeles County Democratic Party, vice chair of the California Democratic Party. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is Charter California Edition. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by James Hellmold. He is the assistant sheriff for Los Angeles County. He's also a candidate for sheriff for Los Angeles County. The primary will be held in June 2014. Explain what it means to be the assistant sheriff for Los Angeles County.
Well, I currently command all of the patrol and detective operations throughout Los Angeles County. Under me, we have division chiefs and commanders, and then the station captains, and then all of the rank and file there. I'm very proud of our organization. There's, despite all of the negativity that's occurred more recently, I'm the person that's standing up for the honest, hardworking deputies and professional staff who've been on the front line protecting our community every single day.
And let's talk about the challenges facing the Sheriff's Department. It's been a rocky few years, I think it's fair to say. And we know that the prior sheriff chose to move aside. Now there's an interim sheriff who is not running for the seat in which you are running. How's everyone doing now that the prior regime has moved on? You're kind of in this wayland right here. How's it going?
It's going very well in the sense that there are some things that need to be fixed and structured, and some people that need to be held accountable, and they are. But at the end of the day, the heart and soul of our department are the frontline, hardworking men and women that are out there on the front lines every day. We patrol 42 contract cities in the unincorporated area. If you talk to the residents in those areas, if you talk to the leaders in the local city councils of our 42 contract cities, they're very happy with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. So we need to keep that in focus. Don't get me wrong, there are absolutely things that need to be fixed, and we can always do better. But I want to remind people about the hard work and dedication of our deputies and professional staff.
So why do you want to step into this job? I mean, you're stepping into a difficult scenario. It's, the prior regime has some challenges. It's a huge department. You have prison realignment before you, budgetary challenges. What made you decide, I want to step up?
Well, you know what? It is personal for me, meaning my father served more than 30 years on the front line, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I've been on for more than 25 years, and I'm committed to the community and to the Sheriff's Department through good times and through bad times. And, it's a tough time right now, but everyone is showing their character, rolling up their sleeves, and getting to work. And we have a spirit of openness and wanting to improve to serve our community. That's exactly why I'm running for sheriff.
Presuming you're victorious, what would you like to do to move the department forward, be it moving into the 21st century, be it with morale? What do you hope to do?
Well, we need to continue the reforms that we've already started. I was brought in after the allegations of misconduct in the jails, and we did work with the jail commission and implemented reforms. We held people accountable. Then when there was crime soaring in the streets, I was brought in to address and tackle the crime. We're now at historic lows in crime. And in the future, what I want to do is modernize our sheriff's department to deal with the emerging threat of cybercrime, identity theft, and advanced technologies. And it's pointed out that, well, he's a young guy, he's 46 years old, but what I like to say is I have 25 years of experience, and not only that, I want to bridge the gap between traditional law enforcement and now moving forward to modernize our force.
And I want to talk to you about 21st century crime. I myself have been a victim of identity theft more than once, and it can be so violative.
That's right.
I was mugged once. That was tough. But the identity theft was worse for some reason. It just felt so violative.
I know what you're saying. There's what we hear from complaints that there's no resolution. There doesn't seem to be an understanding of what to do. And quite frankly, I've attended national forums with major police executives throughout the country in Washington, D.C., spoke at the Senate regarding this. And it's a national problem, meaning there is no consistent standard of who to report it to, how we investigate, who's the agency that investigates, and quite frankly, having consistent across the board technology to deal with this. And that's what I want to demonstrate leadership here in Los Angeles at the hub of technology and modernize your sheriff's department to deal with the emerging threats that we are going to face in the 21st century.
So what needs to be done? I have no idea
Right.
what needs to be done.
Well, and I do. I don't know everything, but I know what we need to do is we need to bring in experts. And they may not necessarily have a crew cut and gone through the Sheriff's Academy.
good.
They may have nose rings and spiked hair.
All good.
This is the type of thing that we need to not think in our traditional manner. We need to change the paradigm, bring in professionals from the corporate world who are truly the experts in technology, and leverage their knowledge and expertise and bring it to law enforcement so we can be ahead of the criminals.
I have to ask you about prison realignment. It is an issue that continues to be on the minds of anyone who works in law enforcement, from sheriffs to DAs to probation officers. We know that as a result of a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, California is required to decrease the size of its prison population. And through what's known as AB 109, we are now seeing lower level offenders serving their time in county facilities, not state facilities. Whether you like AB 109 or not, it is here. And so I want to get a sense from you, as someone who's on the front line now, and presumably if you're victorious, will be in the future, how do you continue to operate in a AB 109 world?
Well, this was thrown on our lap, and your Sheriff's Department is dealing with it in the best way possible. Look at there's a lot of criticism of Sheriff Lee Baca, but let me tell you something. This man invented education-based incarceration, where we have education, rehabilitation, anger management for our inmates, and we always say there's 100% attendance because they're in the jails.
Right.
And so why not take advantage of having our inmates there in one facility? And guess what? Los Angeles has the lowest level of crime reductions in the state of California and leads in the nation. And why is that? Because we have more of a holistic approach. Civil rights activist Connie Rice has been banging this drum of a holistic approach. That's why she's endorsing me, because we need to look at, as opposed to complaining about AB 109, let's take advantage of the situation and really restructure and transform law enforcement moving into the forward.
And I want to talk about this notion of rehabilitating these criminals. I mean, they have been convicted, because part of the goal behind AB 109 is for these lower level offenders, they would serve their time closer to home and presumably could be participants in programs that will help them move on once they get out of prison, because they're going to get out.
Absolutely.
As much as we may not like it, they are going to get out. So how are the programs moving forward? You mentioned the education-based programs. Are you seeing the results? Are we seeing drops in recidivism? Are we seeing increases in recidivism? What are we seeing?
We have seen drops in recidivism, but what I want to do as the next sheriff is go all the way in with it, meaning we have a huge population, in fact, the largest population of mentally ill in our jail facilities. We need to have our mentally ill in proper care and treatment facilities. We have our deputies and professional staff do an outstanding job, and for the most part are conducting themselves with great honor and valor, but we do not possess the skills to deal in a real way as far as treatment of our mentally ill. So for example, when there's an excessive number of mentally ill, A, they're not being treated. B, it's overcrowding our jail system so that we can't focus on real crime such as violent crime, these burglaries, these drive-by shootings that occur. And with that targeted approach to real crime, we've reduced crime to the lowest in more than 40 years.
And when you think about these county facilities, they're not intended to keep folks in for a long period of time, so they don't necessarily hire psychiatrists.
That's correct.
For extended periods. So how are you going to address the question of mental health when that's not the intended purpose of county jails, although it's going to have to be?
Right. Well, in the short term, hey, look, the plane is in the air. In other words, that's the situation we have right now. So in the short term, we have to provide more training to our department members, professional and sworn staff, meaning they need to have better training in dealing with the mentally ill. That's what I'm pounding my fist on, to expand not only in the jails but in the field, because we encounter them on the patrol side, and I command all 23 stations, and I'm pounding my fist saying we need more training for our deputies on the front line. Secondarily, we need to ensure that we have more licensed professionals that are working side by side with the Sheriff's Department so that they can interact and conduct proper treatment for those in need. And then long-term solution would be to work with community-based organizations of licensed professionals throughout the community as opposed to mass incarceration of the mentally ill.
His name is James Hellmold. He is a candidate for sheriff for Los Angeles County. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is Charter California Edition.